Hey, good morning, guys. So we just cleared out a couple cars in the shop, and I think my prayers have been answered. I was asking for something a little smaller that wasn't a Cadillac. I feel like I'm getting a reputation for being the Cadillac guy lately, and that's great. But if you guys have known me for a while, you know my true passion is Datsuns, and so I've got a bunch of my own. I've got a bunch of projects in the backyard that we'll get to eventually, probably, maybe before I die. I don't know. But a good friend sent me a car a couple weeks ago and is letting us kind of get busy with it. And it's a pretty special car. So let me take you outside the shop and I'll show you what we're bringing in today. Well, before I show you the new one, let me show you the menagerie, or at least part of it. So there's my 72 Datsun 510 two-door. If you've followed the channel for a while, that one should know it. It has a rotary engine, custom chassis, a lot of custom work on that one. Next to that is my 71 Datsun 521. You saw that get notched in a video a couple months ago. So that one is ongoing project. And then next to that, I think I did a video a couple years ago of the 72 510 wagon. So that one, we're finally starting to make progress again on it. It sat out back for a long time, but I think I'm ready to start digging in again. So we'll do a follow-up on a couple of those real soon here. But what you've been waiting for, don't worry about that 59 Caddy. Look at this. Oh, baby. All right, so this is a Datsun Bluebird SSS coupe. So we did not get the coupes here in the United States. And the big difference, I mean, there's a lot of differences that are a little more subtle, but the main difference is the roof line. So if you look at my two-door sedan, you can see the rear quarter window, the roof profile is a little more upright. And the coupe has a slanted C-pillar. So that's the big visual difference. Fenders, quarter panels, doors, all pretty much the same, slight differences in trim and all that. But that roof line is what makes this thing rare and special. So this car, it's a bit of a survivor. As you can see, there's still plastic on the door panels. Interior is just about mint. Look at that. Aftermarket 8-track. Too cool. What a special car. Let me pop the hood. There we go. All right. So under the hood, the SSS got dual carburetors, which we did not get here in the United States, power brakes, and I think it was a little higher horsepower. You can see other Japanese touches. We've got the fender mirrors. All of the underhood labeling is all in Japanese. Super cool. Now, this car is pretty close to stock, but not 100%. It already has coilovers on it. He upgraded the battery, obviously. We've got some speakers on the back package tray, but for the most part, this is a very unmolested original Datsun Coupe for the moment. So let's get it on the rack and start tearing it down, and I'll show you what we've got in store. All right, we got her up on the rack, got the wheels off, and almost got started on everything for tear down and realized I should probably show you guys what's going on under here before we get too deep. So don't mind the disconnected brake lines. We'll drain all the brake fluid because these rear arms have to come off for us to modify them. But let me show you around under here. So the Datsun 510 and the Datsun Bluebird have an independent rear suspension. And this one has been slightly modified with some coilovers that go over the shocks in the factory location. Normally there would have been just a shock there, and then a coil spring would sit down in this spring pocket in the control arm, and then right up on this this little nipple up here. So what we're gonna do is we actually have another set of arms, and we're gonna cut this out so that a bag can sit down in it without rubbing. We're gonna drill out the spot welds that hold this perch up into the body sheet metal, and we'll save that in case someone wants to put this thing back to stock at some point. And then we have a plate that will go right up there and mount the, act as the upper bag mount. So as far as the shocks go, we'll pull these coils off, and I'll see if these KYB AGXs will get low enough without bottoming out. If not, we'll get something else on order, some QA1s or something that'll let this thing sit all the way down. But that's basically it. We've got some new control arms that have already been blasted and stripped. So we'll get those pocketed out for the bag and reassembled with new bearings and hoses and all that stuff, and get them back in here, and that will basically tie up the rear. The exhaust is a little low right there, so we'll see what happens with that. Hopefully it doesn't have to be reworked, because this is a nice stainless Fujitsu setup, and it sounds pretty darn good. So we'll hope for the best. This car is so clean. The floors are completely solid. Like no evidence of prior damage anywhere. This is great. That's what we always hope to work on, right? So up front, you can see again, we've got some coilovers. It looks like T3s. We've got some bump steer spacers already in here. Again, T3. So we'll reuse those. We do have some T3 tension rods that have heim joints up here instead of bushings, so that'll give us a little better articulation. And then we'll have to double check and see what we can do to retain the sway bar and get the clearance we need. Hopefully it'll all play nice together, because the sway bar makes a big difference on these cars. Not that this one's going to be doing a whole lot of sporting driving with these original non-vented, solid rotors, tiny little baby calipers, but for just a weekend cruise, it should be just fine. So that's the car underneath. A little bit of an oil leak, it looks like, but other than that, look how clean this thing is. Looks like it's never bottomed out on a speed bump or anything. Japanese roads are notoriously good, so this thing probably lived a pretty charmed life. But it's nice to see that the underneath is just as clean and honest as up top. So, all right, I'm gonna get started on tear down. I'm gonna pull these front brake lines, get all the brake fluid drained out of this thing, and then we can start disassembling suspension. So our customer was nice enough to send a bunch of new and freshly blasted parts our way. Make life a lot easier. So we've got the rear suspension arms. So we need to cut this original spring perch out of them, and our bag cup actually welds in its place, and it's just a slightly larger diameter, so you have room for the bag. So I'll go over that as soon as we get them cut and sort of demonstrate what needs to be done there. And then he's got the stub axles, all of the bearings, seals, hardware. Yeah, it looks like everything. He even had the drum backing plates powder coated, and he's got new shoes, looks like new brake hardware and everything. So this should go together pretty easily. It's been a while since I've assembled one of these, but if I get stuck, I do have a Haynes manual for it, so we'll see how that goes. Up front, he had another set of strut tubes blasted, so we'll be able to cut those off, get the air suspension collars welded to them and everything, and then we can reassemble. And then highly recommended when doing air ride on these cars, set of bump steer spacers or roll center adjusters. Just gets the lower arm sitting a little bit more level at ride height. And then these would be the adjustable tension rods. We don't so much need the adjustment as we need it to be a pillow bearing or heim joint at the front. The bushings will tend to bind when you've got as much travel as the air ride has. And then other than that, it looks like we've got these new drums. All right, how about that? So yeah, should be pretty straightforward getting everything assembled, and then it's really just being super careful putting it on the car and getting everything situated. So let me get everything else unwrapped, take a quick inventory, make sure we don't need to order anything else since we are on a bit of a time crunch, and then we'll get to doing some fabrication and hopefully have this thing ready to put back together pretty quick. All right, with the rear suspension out, we can see these upper spring perches that need to come out. So the bag is basically going to rest right up against the sheet metal of the floor. So we need to get this out of the way to make clearance. Normally we could just cut it, grind it, whatever we need to do to get it off, but we want to make sure this one can go back on if someone wants to return this car to stock at some point. So we're going to just drill out all the spot welds. So it looks like there's about 7 or 8 per side. So we'll mark them, drill them out, and then we've got a spot weld cutter. So we'll cut those out, get this whole thing off, and then I can show you the next steps.
Oh ja, daar ben ik. Beter.
All right, so we got the spot welds drilled out, and with that perch off, you can see the seatbelt, rear seatbelt bolts or nuts are welded in here. We're probably gonna get rid of this bracket too, and that will free everything up, and then obviously grind these spot weld marks down. That'll give us a flat surface to mount the upper bag bracket. No one really rides in the back seat of these anyway, right? So I don't think it's a big deal to lose the original seatbelt mount. If it is, then we can figure something else out later. But for now, I think that'll work. So let's get that all cleaned up and we'll move on. All right, for the rear suspension, we have these new arms. So this is the original spring pocket. You can see that's just a big stamped piece that's welded into the trailing arm itself. Unfortunately, the bag we're going to use doesn't fit down inside that, and there's not enough height above it to just plate over this hole and install the bag on top. So what we're going to do is cut out the spring pocket and weld in this cup instead. So this sits 2 inches down inside the control arm to let the bag collapse. So the bag is 3 inches tall, fully flat. So we'll have it sticking up 1 inch, and that works out perfect with our upper bracket. So we got to mark out the perimeter of this. I'll use a plasma cutter and cut just inside of that, and then take a flap wheel and clean that up so we get a perfect fit, and we can weld that in clean. And then when it's all done, you'll end up with the bag sitting with not a whole lot of room around it, but enough. So let me mark that up. We'll get that all situated and do the other arm, and those will be ready to assemble and put back on the car. Also, as a side note, if any of you ever feel bad about how your welds look, I just want you to see these 50-something-year-old welds on this part that came from the factory. I want you to recognize that they held all this time, so yours probably will too. Sorry for talking shit to whoever the dude was that welded these that day. But every single set of Datsun arms I've seen has been like this, just real ugly welds. All right, moving on. All right, so we got the arm cut out, You have to basically cut the perimeter here and then inside that pocket along the bottom 2 inches down, just over 2 inches, basically the height of the bag cup, so it can sit all the way down in here. So we plasma cut inside the mark we had made, and then basically used a flap wheel to creep up on the size until we had it exactly where we wanted it. And now it is a snug fit. I might be able to do it with one hand. Let's find out. Told you it was snug. There we go. Come on. There we go. So now it sits all the way down in here. We're going to bring it up to flush with some magnets, and then we can basically just weld right around that perimeter and we'll be dialed. So let me get that done on both of these arms. There we go. Fix the clocking. And then we'll be ready to paint these things. All right, so I used a pair of magnets, and held the cup level with the top of the original plate that was in here, and just tacked it in a couple spots. So I'm going to go ahead and TIG weld this all in. We got the gaps close enough that I feel comfortable going with TIG. So yeah, just make it a little cleaner and fancier. So let me get that set up and we'll get to welding. Not too bad. I'm going to talk shit about the Japanese guys welding that put this arm together originally. I guess I better be able to weld decently. But we'll let that cool down, and I've got a couple little areas on the bottom to patch up where the plasma actually came through the outside of the arm while I was cutting it. So we'll get that welded up, and we'll be ready to paint this thing and start putting new bearings, bushings, and all that in there. So let's get that step started and then we'll move on. The next piece of the puzzle is the front struts. Are the front struts? Is the front struts? The next step, next pieces to go on this vehicle are the front struts. So basically what we ship out is a complete strut assembly like this. We've got adjustable camber and a little bit of caster adjustment in that upper plate, a 30-way adjustable damping monotube strut with an airbag over it, and this lower mount is designed to weld onto the factory strut tube. So what we're going to do is measure up a couple inches here, cut the original strut tube off, and then this piece will slide over the original strut housing, and we'll basically weld it right across here, and then paint everything, and it is ready to assemble on the front end. So let me get some cutting done, we'll get that prepped for welding, and I'll show you that next step. All right, so basically what we need to do is take these guys, which are the bottoms of the new air struts. We need to weld them way down here on the old strut tubes. So these guys have a machined lip about 2 inches up inside of there. So we need to cut this tube down to about 2 inches so that this can slide down, give it lots of reinforcement, and then we'll weld right along there. I'm also going to drill a couple of holes into this material so we can do a little bit of a plug weld and just make sure this thing can't twist, wiggle itself off, anything. So what I use is 2-inch wide painter's tape, and that'll give us our 2-inch mark. I left a little bit of a gap down there for the weld edge so that we're welding onto the strut tube and not the cast steel spindle. And I also put these on the belt sander. They come with like a zinc coating to keep them from rusting right down here. So I just want to knock that off so we get a nice, we get some nice material to weld on. So let me put these in the bandsaw, cut them down, and clean them up real quick, and then we'll be ready to weld. All right, with the strut housings cut down and the hole drilled on these, we are ready to assemble, get everything mocked up, and then weld it in place. So when I drilled that hole, it left a little bit of a burr on the inside, so I had to take a deburr tool and clean that up just so this would slide. It's a real tight fit because you don't want this thing wobbling around when you're trying to set everything. So like I mentioned, I'm going to leave just a little bit of a gap up here so that we're welding to the strut tube as well as the cast housing. The housing, the spindle itself is cast steel, so you can weld to it, but it's better just welding straight to mild steel instead. So that's what we're going to do. Let me get this all set up, turn on the TIG welder, and we'll get rocking and rolling. All right, there's one down. So we got most of the perimeter. There's really no way to get all the way inside back there. But I've always done them this way and never had a failure, knock on wood. So I'm gonna call that good. And we'll get this one cooling, get the other one welded up, and they're ready for paint. So the only real modification to the actual body structure of these cars, everything else is just modifying parts that you're gonna bolt on, but this is the only surgery on the actual car itself, is in the rear spring pocket area. So we showed you removing the original spring perch, drilling out those 7 spot welds on each side and taking that off. But we also need to trim back this lip right here so that the bag won't rub on it. Basically, we're just trimming right below the original spot welds, so we're not affecting any of the structural integrity of the inner wheelhouse to the the floor structure or anything. It's all still there. And then we need to drill 3 holes. So we've got 2 holes for the airbag to bolt through, and then we've got 1 larger hole for the airline fitting to poke through. I've got a rag stuffed in here so that we could paint and not get any overspray into the inside. So once that's done, you are ready to bolt the bag in. I showed you the lower arm. The bag will bolt to the lower arm, and that's your rear setup. Shock goes in the factory location, axles go back on, and you're done deal. So if this ever needed to be brought back to stock, you'd have to basically add a little lip right here, a little bit of welding there. You'd need to patch that hole up and weld the seat belt retaining nut back on here, and then that spring perch would actually cover everything that you'd done here, so it would look factory under here again. But I mean, you could even not replace that lip. I don't think most people would even know that that had been modified. It's just, you taper off this little lip here and over here, and it all just kind of looks stock. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Aside from that, everything else is just bolting onto these cars. We're gonna run all of the airlines and wiring and everything either through the interior, through factory grommets into the firewall to get to the battery, and then all the airlines and everything I think we're gonna bring out under here, the airlines and the height sensor wires, and we'll just follow original fuel lines, brake lines, whatever we can under the car. We don't wanna drill any new holes if we can avoid it. These were just unavoidable. So that's pretty much it. If you're worried about the collectible value of these cars, which it's a valid concern, even the 2-door sedans and everything are going way up in value, but especially a coupe like this, you kind of want to make sure later down the road it could be returned to stock. So yeah, I just wanted to show you that detail. All right, we'll get to assembling all those suspension parts and hopefully get them bolted back on today. All right, with everything painted and ready to reassemble, we just have to swap the hubs and calipers over to the new strut housing. Customer had some new backing plates, or old backing plates in good condition, powder coated, so that's nice. He sent us seals and bearings. Unfortunately, the bearings are the wrong ones. Good news is the ones that we pulled out of here are in excellent condition, at least on the other strut. So we'll inspect these. If we need to get new ones, we'll get them next day aired over here, but I think we'll get away with just doing a new grease seal, obviously a new cotter pin, and then we'll just swap everything over. So let me get set up, knock that out, and I'll be right back. All right, we got everything switched over. Bearings are repacked with fresh grease. I just wanted to show you one detail. So we've got the dust cap, and it's not all beat to crap. So I looked around the shop, and look at this. The piece of strut tube that we cut off of here happens to be just the right diameter to put over that. And then we can hammer on that instead and get that all seated on the flange without beating up the dust cap. Yay. All right. Moving on. All right. Calipers back on, dust caps on. So we are ready to thread the air strut back into this tube. I always use just a little bit of grease on those threads just to make sure they don't gall up or anything. I haven't really had that issue with these airlift struts, but I've seen it with some other stuff. So might as well just do it. let me get that together and we're all set. All right. Now we've got a pair of completely assembled front struts. We've just threaded them all the way down into the bodies until they bottomed out and then rotated it enough to get the air ports facing towards the body of the car, away from the wheel. So that way we can loop the airline up and out of harm's way. So next step, we'll get all the rest of the front suspension parts together and get everything reassembled. All right, moving on to the rear suspension. We've got all new bearings and bushings for the stub axles and for the pivots. He had everything powder coated, stub axles and axle flange. Looks like he even had these plated, killer. And the drum backing plates have been freshly powder coated and looks like those were blasted, so I'll make sure that actually functions properly. But let's get everything greased up. Let's get these bearings pressed in. And the only thing we are waiting on, the only thing he didn't provide are the new flange nuts. All right, well, I hate drum brakes. Now I remember why, because they're a total pain in the ass to assemble. First one, we put the backing plate onto the arm and then went to assemble everything and realized that these pins are really hard to get in once the whole arm is in the way. So learned that lesson. Now we assembled the entire drum brake assembly off of the arm, and we'll be able to bolt this on, put the bearings in, put the stub axle in, and then we'll be good to go. So for your reference, here is how a Datsun 510 drum brake assembly goes together. You're welcome. All right, back to it. All right, here's where we got today. So we got those front struts built with all the brake hardware, new bearings, not new bearings, reused bearings, freshly repacked. We've got Techno Toy tuning, tension rods, and bump steer spacers. And then we've got the struts, air struts up in there. We reused the stock lower arms. You can change to aftermarket adjustable ones if you want. With these wheels and tires, there wasn't any room to push camber like crazy or anything, or really no need to do it. So we didn't. We've got brake lines hooked back up, and we've got the leader line for the air strut just tucked back here for now. So tomorrow's project will be routing the air lines out to all four corners and routing the height sensor wires out to all four corners, and then figuring out where the height sensors are going to go on the front and rear suspension. I've done the rear suspension on my 510, at least the lower. The upper should just be a matter of finding a good spot in the wheel well for it. The front I have not done, so we'll be figuring that out as we go. Possibly clamp something to the sway bar and find a spot on the strut tower. I don't know yet. We'll take a look and see. But it's all in there. All the bolts are tight. This side's done as well. So we've got tons of adjustability, and it's all nice, good, solid stuff that won't bind as it travels. Moving to the back, let me take you around. We got the upper bag plate and bag bolted to the subframe, and the lower arms are in. You watched us rebuild those. We've got the emergency brake cables hooked back up. We've got the brake hard lines and hoses hooked back up. Bags are bolted to the trailing arms. So all we're waiting on are those stub axle flange nuts, and then we can bolt the axle shafts back up, and we're ready to go. We robbed the KYB shocks off of the coilovers that were on here and cycled the suspension up, and they compress just fine along with the bag. So we're gonna reuse those. Should ride really nice. Other than that, I think we're ready to go. So tomorrow the Nissan dealership said those nuts should be in. We'll grab those, and we should be ready to put this thing on four wheels and set it on the ground. All right, got the car back up in the air, got the wheels off. Time to figure out the height sensors. What I'm thinking for the front suspension is to bolt off of one of the bolts that holds the cross member to the subframe, to the unibody. And we can make a bracket that basically extends up and just rests against the inner wheel well here, right above that piece of sheet metal. We'll just make a little L bracket that keys into that and bolts this on. That'll give us plenty of travel and be clear of any moving parts, steering and all of that, and points the plug straight down where it'll kind of tie right in with the airlines and everything. We've just got this zip tied for now to keep it out of the way. So I think that'll work out pretty well. And then we'll just either clamp or weld a tab off of the sway bar because it moves with the lower control arm, and that'll get us the position readings that we need. So let me design a quick bracket in CAD, and either we'll get them laser cut or I will transfer that onto some sheet metal and just make them here real quick. As far as the rear suspension goes, it's a little trickier because there's just no bolt holes in this wheel well at all. Lower arm's no big deal. We can just, drill and tap a thread somewhere on this flat part of the arm for the lower to, the rod to go up to the sensor. But up top, we don't want to drill any holes into the sheet metal if we can avoid it. So what I'm thinking up here is probably get some silicone adhesive, some like E6000 or something like that, make a sheet metal plate that the sensor will bolt to, and then just basically glue it somewhere up in here. So somewhere where it'll be out of the way of any suspension travel or anything. And then if you had to reverse that, you're just basically peeling that off and maybe having to re-undercoat if it takes some of that with it. So I think that's the move. So let me cut a couple of panels and let's see how that all works out. Give me just a couple minutes. All right, so I went ahead and drew this up in CAD. It's a pretty simple little bracket. Basically, we've got a slotted bolt hole with a window to access the bolt, and clamp this into that cross member, above the cross member. 2 holes up there to mount the height sensor, and that's it. Just a 90-degree bend across those little bend reliefs. What I'm gonna do to get this done is I'm gonna spray adhesive this to this piece of 18 gauge sheet metal and just cut it out by hand, drill the holes, grind that out with a burr tool, and then after some paint and everything, it'll look just as good as laser, right? Or close enough to get the job done anyway. Same thing with the rears. The rears are just gonna be a big, kind of rectangle with a couple of holes, enough surface area for that glue to hold, and we'll knock those out as well. Give me a couple minutes, I'll get this glued down, cut, and bent and all that, and I'll show you how it goes on the car. Oh, there we go. Yeah, it's not as pretty as laser cutting, but it gets it done right now, today, and for future stuff, if any of you other bag Datsun guys want these, I'll have them and I'll get them laser cut. So that'll basically sit right up here, and that bolt for the cross member should, let's see if I can do this one-handed. Hang on. Oh boy. This worked in mock-up. Hang on a second. Put the bolt through it first. Basically, the bolt is set back in this kind of little recess, so we need to make the hole for it slotted so that it can kind of push the bracket in. But all right, so with the bolt in, there we go. That's what I had in mind. So then we can just tighten that down with the nut. That'll hold everything down nice and tight, and that'll be right up against it. The heads of the bolts that mount this might pull this out just a touch from the sheet metal of the wheel well, but when everything's all blacked out, you won't even be able to tell. So that looks like a success. So that's front done. Let me make some plates for the rear real quick. I've got some adhesive that I think will work for that. And once that's dialed in, then we can set the lower mounts, the little tabs, and get the linkage figured out and all that stuff. And then we're just down to plumbing and wiring, and this thing is done. All right, let's get after it. All right, these rear height sensors fought me a little bit, but I think we've got them dialed in now.
So on the lower, I welded a tab to the lower arm, and up top, I epoxied a plate with the height sensor to the inner wheel well. So I used some sort of fast setting epoxy. There's almost no tension on all of this. You know, there's no binding, there's no, you know, it freewheels. So I don't think it's gonna be a problem as far as being epoxied. If it is, we'll have to talk him into drilling a couple holes, but hopefully it should be fine. The wiring for that, we ran down, and I used, let's see if I can get in there. I used a, one of the like, it's a sheet metal clip that usually you'd like, if you were mounting a door panel or a speaker or something, you'd put a screw through it, but it's got some tension to it. So I just basically used that with a zip tie to hold the line against this lip, and then it goes and picks up the brake line further down, which, get in there, there we go, and then loops up over the diff and all that to catch up with the rest of the bundle up here. Same deal on this side, so that down to that. It's got the motion basically almost exactly how you want it. Lots and lots of travel, so it's as accurate as it can possibly be. I did have to heat up and bend the arm just so it wasn't sticking like right out pointing towards the tire. So we tucked it in so it's a little tighter to the inner wheel well. If he was running a really high offset wheel that got close to the inside here, we'd need to rethink this, but he's gonna run either stock wheels or these Hayashis that he's got. So I think we're gonna be just fine. So now that that's done, I can drop this thing down, put the wheels on it and roll it away from the rack, and hook up all of the wiring and plumbing in the trunk. So let me drop it down, get the wheels on, and I will show you what we got. So the back package tray had some holes cut in it for speakers, and it was just, the vinyl was all peeling up. So we found something that's pretty dang close to the original color. It's a little lighter, obviously, but it's got the same marble pattern in it, and the same grain texture. So I'm hoping once it's in there and surrounded by some other panels, it'll look kind of right at place. I mean, you're looking through the back window at it, so should be close enough for our needs. So I'm ready to put these panels back in, get the back seats back in, button up all the wires and air lines and everything, and I think this thing's about ready to leave. All right, we got the panel back in, the panels. You can see now that it's in here in a dark interior, it's pretty damn good. A little lighter, but I don't think anyone's gonna bitch. I just brought the speaker wires all the back for now. I'm gonna hook them up and then just put some felt pads under the speakers rather than bolting them through with the little retainers they had. If he wants to cut holes in this brand new panel, he can, but I won't. So yeah, let me get the back seat back in and we are on the home stretch here. All right, and that is a complete interior.
All right, guys, it looks like we are wrapping this thing up. Interior's back together, trunk's back together, wiring's done, plumbing's done, sat up overnight, no leak downs, calibration is done, test drive's done. yeah, I think we're dialed. Let me give you a quick final tour around this thing, show you what we did and kind of how we did it, and we'll pull it outside for some beauty shots and wipe it down. And then this afternoon it's going on a trailer and we are heading 20-hour drive out to Long Beach for JCCS this weekend. So let's wrap it up. We'll start in the trunk. Nothing too crazy. We didn't want to do anything permanent. We didn't want to make any holes. So we've got an Airlift 3H. We've got a Viair 485C air compressor. We did a 24-inch seamless tank. We did everything in 1/4 inch, partially because the car is super light, doesn't need big lines to move, but also to make it a whole lot easier to route everything through existing body grommets and holes and brake lines and such. So we've got a water trap coming out of the tank, feeding the manifold. On the exhaust of the manifold, we've got just a line looped around with an adapter to run a SMC adjustable muffler on the dump port, the exhaust port. So that'll quiet it down and also kind of smooth out and slow down the drop. But yeah, just basically real simple. I've got the whole panel sitting on these pivoting rubberized feet. So I'll put a link to those in the description. I just got them off of Amazon, and they've got an adjustment for height so you can level the panel out. And then since this floor has kind of a bow to it, they've got a ball and socket, so they sort of sit on the floor nice and smooth. So it's plenty solid. It is just floating. It's not mounted at all, but just simple. Everything wiring and plumbing wise is just tucked behind this panel off to the side of the gas tank. Again, just zip tied up and tucked away, because there's no, we didn't want to mount anything, drill any holes, any of that stuff. So it's all just right behind there, pretty easy to access if it needs maintenance. He's got the original trunk mat, so that'll go over all of this. I told him he'll have to build like a little riser, maybe just even like a piece of 2x2, wood or whatever, just to match the height of the tank. It does sit a little above the level of the floor here. If you were building your own and didn't care about putting some holes in it, this 6-inch diameter seamless tank, if you mounted it straight to the trunk floor without the panel and the riser and all that, the feet, you'd be able to get this under the floor, under the mat flush, but that wasn't an option here. But regardless, it's still going to be, hidden away. Even with the trunk mat raised up in the back, you kind of won't be able to tell. So that's pretty much the trunk. Moving forward, we routed all the wiring. The height sensor wires and air lines run through the hole where the fuel line drops out of the trunk and runs under the car. The power wire, ignition wire, and the controller wire for the 3H system come up behind the back seat, behind that panel I showed you, and then it runs just along with some other interior wiring under the carpet until we get up under the dash. For the controller, I just left the cable long and tucked it out of the carpet. I would have loved to have mounted it in this cool old center console, but I wasn't going to put a hole in it. So for now, it's just sitting in the pocket. The controller's in the pocket for the center console. If he wants to mount it somewhere, he can, but I'm guessing he'll probably just tuck it under the seat when he's not using it. For the ignition wire, there was some existing circuitry under here for the turn signals that had just a male and female spade connector. So I just made a patch cable that basically grabs that circuitry, ties into it. That way we weren't even splicing into any factory wires. And then finally, the power and ground wires for the compressor and the 3H run up through the factory grommet in the firewall. And then here, we'll come back around. And they come out with all of this bundle. They tuck immediately into the hole in the side of the strut tube, the fender strut area, and then come through out here
along with the, that's the way the hood release cable is routed. So we loop that around. It's all nicely insulated and all that. It comes up and we just tucked in the wiring into the existing battery terminals. We got the fuse right there and all that stuff. So minimal intrusion again, just clean and simple. And basically you look under here and aside from the battery and the camber plates, you really don't know that anything's been done. So this is basically your driving ride height, your number 2 setting, if you will. Rides great, drives great. Not a whole lot of camber on that rear, as you can see. Pretty standard for a lowered 510, mild drop. You only get that extreme camber when it's all the way aired out, which, you're not driving at that height, so you don't really have to worry about anything. We did a quick alignment on it, so it's good to go. Drives nice and straight. And yeah, interiors all together. I don't know if I've showed you this side at all, but just such a flawless car inside. Got a Pioneer 8-track to match those speakers on the back deck. And man, I just love it. Oh, hey, what's that on the seat? Oh, look at that. That's our Twisted Images and Bluebird Society collaboration shirts. Look for those down in the description. All right, I think we are just about done. I think that wraps up the vehicle tour. So let's pull it outside and air it out so you guys can see this thing. Well, in typical old car day before the show fashion, this one decided to sink one of its carb floats again. I thought I had soldered it up and gotten it working, but clearly that's not the case because we are dripping fuel out of the overflow again. That's all right. It'll be enough to get it on the trailer, and he's got a spare float that he's going to bring with him to the show, so we'll be in good shape. But look at that. That is so cool. All right, I have a bunch to do today. We are going to pull all the wheels and hubs off the trailer, make sure they are greased, good condition, the spares there and ready to go. Got all my tools collected. So I don't have time to make any more video stuff with this car, at least not for now. Once we're on the road, I'll probably take a few clips and share them with you, and then hopefully we'll get some reactions from the people at JCCS that's at the show. But for now, I think we're going to wrap this part of the video up. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for supporting us and buying our products and all of that stuff. Means the world. It's a lot of fun getting to work on other people's stuff and make it cool, or even cooler. So thanks again, guys. We'll see you soon.